Buenos tardes, amigos. I am going to sit here and read a few more stories to you. So while we're enjoying this break from the brick and mortar school, you can still hear some stories. So here we go. First one I'm going to read is called Mistletoe. Oh boy, this guy, he's something else. Mistletoe. 'Twas the season, and Moose was merry. He was joyfully tickling the ivories with a tuneful of tidings and a flurry of fa-la-las. He was so full of ho-ho-hos, even his mustache had the holiday spirit. I think we can see that. But Moose was more than just a bit merry and bright. He was busy, busy, busy. There was a lot to be done on his list of to-dos, but with orderly organization, a bit of regimentation, lots of imagination, and just plain old Moose know-how, getting ready for the big day should have been simple, easy, yes, in all probability, just perfectly perfect. He wasted not one merry minute. Moose got moving and put some hustle into the holiday bustle. He went to work. He wrote cards and letters till his hooves hurt. Check. And he shot till he dropped. Check. He hauled home boxes and bags and presents galore. Moose had gifts for everyone stacked from ceiling to floor. Check. Check, check, and then he rapped, yo, 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 and he ribboned, ho, 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 and on each and every package, he tied a big, beautiful bow. Check and double check. So far, so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect. Another look at the list, and Moose headed for the kitchen. He pulled out the pots, the pans and bowls, sifted through stacks and racks of cookbooks. He whisked with his left, spooned with his right. Moose baked tons of tins of cookies. Check. Dozens of cakes, breads, and sweets. Check, check, check. He made jellies, sticky jams. Moose roasted a goose and some chestnuts. He toasted marshmallows and yams. Check, check, check. Triple check. Yes, yes. So simple, so easy. But of course, so perfectly perfect. Decorations were up next on his list of things to do and get done. So Moose decked the halls, then spruced up the walls. He beaded, bowed, and mistletoed. He gathered garlands, roped wreaths and holly, jingled bells, sang noels. Oh, good golly, this Moose was jolly. Check, 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 check. Last but not least, he hung all the stockings. Each and every one was special care. Just in time, too. Soon, Santa would be there. Check and final check. Yes, sirree, getting ready for Christmas was an absolute snap. And so simple, so easy. And if he did say so himself, Moose thought totally, utterly, completely, perfectly perfect. On that night before Christmas, Mother, little Sissy, Bucky, and Junior looked all through the house. What a job Moose had done. Everything looked bountiful, festive, quite fine indeed. There was just one minor problem, if you will. Oh dear, sighed the missus, as the five stared at one empty corner. Oh my, oh me, oh gee. Pop, what happened? Cried Junior. Oh, you forgot the tree. Oops. Where would they hang the tinsel, string the popcorn, light the lights? Where would Santa leave his gifts for the kiddies on Christmas Eve night? So Moose pulled out his galoshes, put on his hat. He would find a tree somewhere, somehow, and that's all there was to that. So out went the Moose, braving blusterly blowing winds and the cold, trudging through snowdrifts, courageous and bold. Moose first hoofed it down to the corner. Not a tree to be had. And then he slid around the block. Uh-oh, things were looking bad. He went down every boulevard, street, and little road. He looked down lanes and alleys. Every tree had been sold. There wasn't a branch, not a twig, not even one lousy bowless bough hanging around. Nope, nada, nothing, not a tree to be found. No trees, sighed a sad moose as he came home empty-handed that snowy eve. The kids tried to make the best of it. They said, "Oh, so who needs a tree?" But Moose could plainly see they were short on the glee. He knew he had to do something, and that's just what he did. In the empty corner he stood, spread out his arms out very wide, and then he smiled at his children, and he winked at his bride. "Kids," he declared, "fetch your forgetful pop, some of that tried and true family glop." Oh, look at him. I like the kids there. You see that sign they're putting on the wall? It says, "Dear Santa, we don't have a tree, but leave presents here." And they put an X. They're not taking any chances. So back came the kids carrying a big pot of glue, and without a word to one another, they knew just what to do. They each took a part, grabbing strands, taking hold, then carefully, oh so carefully, they glopped and they plopped, they plastered and they pressed, they curled and they twirled every which way a follicle could fathom, until Moose's magnificent moustache was indeed even more of a marvel to see. Moose was just a few needles shy of being an evergreen tree. They strung Moose with lights from his head to his toes and draped him with tinsel, beginning right with his nose. They hung balls that were shiny and bells that twinkled, candy canes, berries, and plum sugar sprinkled. Then they all stood back. Junior plugged in his pop. Ooh, ah, yes, Moose truly was one incredible sight. He was glorious and glowing, and boy, oh boy, was he bright. Then Junior placed the star on top of Moose's head. He gave him a kiss and a pat, and they all headed off to bed. Except Moose, of course. He stayed in the corner instead, still twinkling and blinking and waiting for Santa. Oh, so it wasn't so simple, and it wasn't so easy. And okay, it wasn't so perfectly perfect. But do you know what? It was pretty close. Ho, ho, ho. Uh-oh. I think somebody's in the room with him. There, that's Mistletoe. What an adventure. Now here's one you might have asked yourself sometimes. How did Santa ever get his job? Well, this book is going to answer that. How Santa Got His Job by Stephen Krinsky and illustrated by S.D. Schindler. Oh, and I forgot on Mistletoe to give the credit to the author. It's Margie Palatine, illustrated by Henry Cole on Mistletoe. But I like this one here, How Santa Got His Job. I don't know if that's him or not. Somebody's reaching out for a newspaper. When Santa Claus was a young man, he went out looking for a job. Santa wanted no part of desks or offices. He liked to stay on the move. His first job was cleaning chimneys. Santa was sure-footed on even the steepest roofs, and he loved twisting through the tight spaces. Oh boy. But there was a problem. Santa was so neat that he never got covered in soot or made a mess in the fireplace, so nobody believed him when he said he was done. "Yeah, where's the proof?" said some. "You're not even dirty," said others. This led to a lot of arguments. Santa worked for the post office next, where everyone could see that he was doing his job. Santa's favorite part was bringing packages to people all over town. Waiting in traffic was frustrating, though. It's a silly waste all this time, he decided. To speed things up, he started making deliveries in the middle of the night. But there was a problem. No one was glad to see him at that hour. The postmaster got so many complaining letters that Santa had to leave. Since Santa had discovered he enjoyed staying up late, he tried cooking at an all-night diner. It felt good to fill orders for customers. Sometimes Santa even surprised people with extra helpings. "Oh, I couldn't eat another bite," many of them insisted. Well, maybe just one. But there was a problem. Every night Santa tasted and sampled and tasted some more before he brought anything out of the kitchen. Oh, he gained a lot of weight. Hoping to get more exercise, Santa then found a spot at the zoo. He was very organized about the animals. I know when they're sleeping," said Santa, "and when they're awake." Over time, he also learned whether they were behaving themselves or not. But there was a problem. Santa became such close friends with the reindeer, all the other animals got jealous. Sadly, the zookeeper had to let him go. By now, Santa was starting to get discouraged. He didn't even notice what the reindeer were doing behind him. They worked hard to cheer him up. Oh, oh boy. Together, they joined the circus. Soon the reindeer were shooting Santa out of a cannon 3 times a night. Santa liked flying through the air and wearing his new costume. He was a big success. But there was a problem. The ringmaster wanted to build up the suspense. "You need to look frightened," he told Santa. We want the crowd to worry about you." But Santa was having so much fun for that. "Ho, ho, ho," he always cried as he flew through the air. So the crowd, they weren't worried at all. The angry ringmaster soon fired Santa and the reindeer. As they gathered their things, some elves came looking for autographs. When they heard the news, they invited Santa and the reindeer home for supper. The elves lived way out of town. They were toy makers, and their house was their workshop. Santa was amazed. "Oh, children must love these toys," he said. But the elves, they looked embarrassed. Well, they only made toys for their own pleasure. Selling them was just too much trouble. "Well, what if you give them away?" Santa asked. The elves hadn't thought of that. "Well, I could deliver them for you," Santa offered. There were enough toys here for children all over the world. The elves smiled, and they hired him on the spot. The elves made Santa a special sack that was always big enough no matter how many toys were put in it. And then they built him a sleigh, and the polar bears offered to pull it. But they were very strong and whipped Santa across the snow. Oh, but there was a problem. Oh, it was the biggest problem yet. Oh, no. To Santa's surprise, the problem could be solved. Santa and the reindeer practiced every day. They made a few mistakes at first, but soon they learned to work as a team. Yeah, I'd say somebody's making a mistake there. Flying upside down, huh? In the darkest part of winter, when people need their spirits lifted the most, Santa got ready to go. As the elves said goodbye, they gave Santa an emergency kit. It held a compass, ski goggles, cough drops, and other things. Santa thanked them very much. All his jobs had taught him it was good to be prepared. Then Santa and his reindeer took off. That first night was a little hard because Santa was still learning about shortcuts and high winds, but at last he got the hang of it. Ever since then, the elves have made toys all year, and Santa's given them away in one night. He loves his job as much as ever, and he's gotten pretty good at it over the years. Still, he always keeps his emergency kit close by. Because no job is perfect. I love that, how all the jobs Santa had was training him on what he was going to end up doing with his life. And that same goes with you guys too. While you're growing up, you're going to get a lot of different jobs doing some of this and some of that, but every bit of it is going to help you learn more and more. And then when you get that final job that you're going to love for the rest of your life, voila, you'll know it. Now here's one I just have to read. It's called The Polar Express by Chris Vandalsberg. And I love this story, and Chris Vandalsberg is what we call a local author because he was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He doesn't live there anymore. He lives, I think, in New York somewheres. But he was born and raised here, which shows you guys it could happen to you. You could become an author too. So here we go. These pictures are beautiful. The Polar Express. And another thing, he not only writes the stories himself, he does his own illustrations too. That is really neat. On Christmas Eve, many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound a friend had told me I'd never hear, the ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. There's no Santa, my friends had insisted, but I knew he was wrong. Late that night I did hear sounds, though not of ringing bells. From outside came the sounds of hissing steam and squeaking metal. I looked through my window and saw a train standing perfectly still in front of my window. Wow. That'd freak you out, wouldn't it? Look out your window and there's a train out there? Yikes. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. A conductor stood at the open door of one of the cars. He took a large pocket watch from his vest, then looked up at my window. I put on my slippers and robe, and I tiptoed down the stairs and out the door. "All aboard!" the conductor cried out. So I ran up to him. "Well," he said, "are you coming?" "Where?" I asked. "Why, to the North Pole, of course," was his answer. "This is the Polar Express." So I took his outstretched hand, and he pulled me aboard. The train was filled with other children, all in their pajamas and nightgowns. We sang Christmas carols and ate candies with nougat centers as white as snow. We drank hot cocoa as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars. Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northward. That was one of my favorite scenes in that movie. I'm sure most of you have seen the Polar Express. Oh, my. Then there was no more lights to be seen. We traveled through cold, dark forests where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid from our train as it thundered through the quiet wilderness. Oh, that'd be neat to see all those wolves out there. We climbed mountains so high it seemed as if we would scrape the moon. But the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster we ran along, rolling over peaks and through valleys like a car on a roller coaster. The mountains turned into hills, the hills to snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice and the great polar ice cap. Lights appeared in the distance. They looked like the lights of strange ocean liners sailing on a frozen sea. "There," said the conductor, "is the North Pole." The North Pole. It was a huge city standing alone at the top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first we saw no elves. "Oh, they're gathering at the center of the city," the conductor told us. "That is where Santa will give the first gift of Christmas." "Well, who receives the first gift?" we all asked. And the conductor answered, "He will choose one of you." "Look!" shouted one of the children. "The elves!" Outside we saw hundreds of elves. As our train drew closer to the center of the North Pole, we slowed to a crawl. So crowded were the streets with Santa's helpers. And then the Polar Express could go no further. We stopped, and the conductor led us outside. We pressed through the crowd to the edge of a large open circle. In front of us stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited, and they pranced and paced, ringing the silver sleigh bells that hung from their harnesses. It was a magical sound like nothing I'd ever heard. Across the circle, the elves moved apart, and Santa Claus appeared, and the elves cheered wildly. He marched over to us and pointed to me and said, "Let's have this fellow here." He jumped into his sleigh, and the conductor handed me up. I sat on Santa's knee, and he asked, "Now, what would you like for Christmas?" I knew I could have anything and any gift that I could imagine. But the thing I wanted most for Christmas was not inside Santa's giant bag. What I wanted more than anything was one silver bell from Santa's sleigh. And when I asked Santa, he smiled, and then he gave me a hug and told an elf to cut a bell from the reindeer's harnesses. And the elf tossed it up to Santa, and he stood holding the bell high above him and called out, "The first gift of Christmas." A clock struck midnight as the elves roared their approval. Santa handed the bell to me, and I put it in my bathrobe pocket. The conductor helped me down from the sleigh, and Santa shouted out the reindeers' names and cracked his whip, and his team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled once above us and then disappeared into the cold, dark polar sky. As soon as we were back inside the Polar Express, the other children asked to see the bell. I reached into my pocket, but the only thing I felt was a hole. I had lost the silver bell from Santa's sleigh. "Oh, let's hurry outside and look for it," one of the children said, but the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving. We were on our way back home. It broke my heart to lose the bell, and when the train reached my house, I sadly left the other children. I stood at my doorway and waved goodbye. The conductor said something from the moving train, but I couldn't hear him. "What?" I yelled out. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Merry Christmas!" he shouted, and the Polar Express let out a loud blast from his whistle, and it sped away. On Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I opened our presents, and when it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree, and it had my name on it. Inside was the silver bell, and there was a note. "Found this on the seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C." I shook the bell, and it made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes," said my father, "it's broken." When I'd shaken the bell, my parents had not heard the sound. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell, but as years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, a bell still rings for me, as it does for all those who truly believe. And that was Chris Vandalsberg's The Polar Express. Not quite as fancy as the movie, but a pretty good story. Now here's what I just found today. It's called The Christmas Tree Ship. Now this is based on a real story. Most of this really did happen, but of course it's embellished with other characters to make it a great story. But this is called The Christmas Tree Ship. It is by Carol Crane and illustrated by Chris Ellison. I think you'll enjoy this story. Oh, I got to show you that ship. It's one of the old schooners that used to sail out on Lake Michigan all the time. In fact, my great-grandmother, who used to come over here from Chicago, would sail on one of those in the summer and spend her whole summer here in Grand Haven and then sail back for the rest of the year. So I got a little connection to that. When Tim and I were boys, we lived with Grandpa Axel and Grandma Hannah in the lighthouse on Lake Michigan. We both loved to help Grandpa Axel with his job as a lighthouse keeper. I could carry Grandpa's toolbox so he could check the light and test the foghorn. Many times a ship passing by would toot its horn and the crew would wave to us. Oh, I especially loved it when the sailors saluted us. Grandpa taught us all about the water. He told us that Lake Michigan is like a child with many moods. Sometimes the mood is very, very good, and sometimes it's very, very bad. Grandpa could tell if a storm was brewing just by feeling the wind. Wait long enough, he'd tell us, and the weather will change with the wind. One day, just before Christmas, I could tell a storm was on its way. The crisp air had turned damp, and the water near shore had become a dark, greenish colored froth. Black clouds quickly began to roll in. Tim and I figured that the lake sure was in a bad mood. Grandpa hurried us inside the warm kitchen before we got soaked. Grandma Hannah was baking a batch of her sweet-smelling ginger cookies, and my cousins were sitting out glasses of milk. Grandpa Axel then sat down in his story rocker. It was a hand-carved chair, one he had brought with him from Sweden. My cousins Tim and I gathered close to the chair. I got to get me one of those chairs. We each had our favorite story, but mine was the story of the Christmas tree ship. It must have been one of Grandpa's favorites too, because he looked towards me and then smiled and winked as he picked up his carving and he began speaking slowly, weaving again the tale I so loved. There's another picture of that ship. Every year, Captain Santa, now that's not the real name of this guy, but they called him Captain Santa. He picked up that nickname. Would load up his little schooner, the Ruth Simmons, with thousands of beautiful Christmas trees from our northern Michigan forest. Now, you children know the lake, and you know how stormy it is in November, but every year, Captain Santa braved the weather to bring those trees to the children of Chicago. This year, he had told his wife Barbara that this was the final trip. He was growing old, and the Ruth Simmons was growing old, and as much as he loved selling and sometimes giving away those Christmas trees, this year was going to be his last. He and his crew set off across the lake with 5,000 trees, all bundled tightly in the hold and lashed to the deck. The captain had sailed the ship all his life, and he knew when a storm was coming. He felt the wind change, he felt the dampness in the air, and he had all the sails hoisted to race that storm across the lake. But the wind blew harder and harder, and the sleet, ice, and snow covered that little schooner and her trees, and eventually pulled her under the water. Then the schooner slowly slipped beneath the churning lake. Lost were the captain and his crew. Oh, this Christmas ship heartbreak. Oh boy. And that really did happen. Grandpa got up and walked over to the window. If you could see straight across the lake, he told us, you'd see the shores of Wisconsin. A little to the south would be Two Rivers, Wisconsin, very near where the ship went down. After that storm, the winds from the southwest washed driftwood and treasures from the Ruth Simmons clear across the lake and onto our Michigan shores. I have something to show you, said Grandpa. The waves buried in the sand for quite a few years, but the wind uncovered it. Oh. Grandpa pulled something out of his pocket. It was a corroded tag that said, Chicago Market, 1912. These copper straps were used to bundle Christmas trees together, he told us. Grandpa said that after the Ruth Simmons went down, some of the trees were found still in their bundles. We pulled the trees out of the lake, and in honor of the captain, everyone helped put a tree up on the lighthouse for all to see. The very next year, the children of Chicago were sad. Captain Santa would not arrive at the pier. But then something wonderful happened. There in the same spot was another schooner laden with beautiful Christmas trees. Miraculously, the next year, an old schooner did appear, moored at the same spot with trees, but who had anchored it there? It was the captain's wife, Barbara, and her daughters. They had decided the Christmas tree ship tradition would live on. Somehow trees would be provided. For the brave heart of her husband, recalling his true dedication, she brought trees from the north, a deed of respect and admiration. Grandpa had finished telling the old story. Every year, one of Grandpa's carvings was hung on our Christmas tree. Eagerly awaiting, we wiggled in anticipation of who would be chosen to add the wooden carving. That year, I got to hang the ornament, a replica of Captain Santa's schooner that once carried Christmas trees to Chicago. My sound director and isn't getting my signals to come over here. I got to have her shut this all down. But next week, or well, maybe the next time I read, which maybe it'll be tomorrow, I've got a neat tale of this Christmas ship that the Coast Guard had sailed a load of trees over in honor of that captain. So tomorrow, I maybe will read that one. So look forward to that one. So here we go. Adios, amigos. See you later.